You are listening to the Beltway Wars Invitational Podcast, hosted by Adam Jackson and Patrick Wilton. Enjoy the show.
And welcome back to the Beltway Wars Invitational Podcast with your host, Adam Jackson and Patrick Wilton. As always, Week 14 is over. The playoffs are set. We have our teams. We have our losers in the consolation bracket. And the season, the regular season, came to a close as of Monday night. Patrick, we have the playoff team set. I know you kind of wanted to do a little bit of a rankings rewind for this, so let's just go over who made it, who didn't, maybe some interesting storylines from that, in this week's Ranking Rewind. Rankings Rewind!
All right, Ranking Rewind. First thing I want to talk about here has nothing to do with football.
Okay.
I want to talk about the final standings of the 2024 cookie party.
Oh, no.
Because for those of you who don't know, most of you probably do, Scott of the Westminster Wonder Boys and Tom host a cookie party where we make cookies, and Tom and Scott are judges, as is our good friend Colby. And
loyal listener of the show, Colby, who's not even in the league.
Yep, longtime listener, Colby for sure. Shout out to Colby, who complimented my cookie, but we'll get there. So just thought it was interesting here. So just like Tom and Scott are judges, we have Charlie first in our league, and had the highest score, a third place. Was it a second or a third? I think it was a third.
Well, in the end, it should have been a DQ because it's not a cookie, but that's completely fine. I think it was third place that he got.
Controversy, yeah. So you want to explain that to people?
Yeah, so I mean, he basically did an ice cream sandwich, and that's not a cookie. And he, with his evil grin that we know and love from Charlie, said, "I'd like to create controversy." So he knew what he was doing. He was the person that let all the cookies through, so he made sure to place himself in the right position to be able to get his cookie through without any scrutiny, and he ends up in third place.
Yeah, I thought it was weird when he walked in and was like avoiding Scott and Tom and kind of walked up to me and he's like, hands me a container and says, "Go put this in the freezer." I'm like, "What?" He's like, don't ask, just go put it in the freezer, but don't let Scott see it." So I'm like, "Oh, okay, all right, okay, whatever." So anyway, yeah, we've had controversy before my time in the competition. There's been controversy, right? With
there's been a brownie, there's been a lemon bar,
a brownie, right? So just the new iteration of controversy. Charlie did finish the highest of everybody in the league. I think next we had Brian's girlfriend Grace did the majority of the legwork. I did some scouting of that team. Grace did a lot of the work. Brian took him out of the oven and sprinkled some salt on him, but that's about it. So he gets maybe an assist on that one. I think they had a fourth place. This is about 15 cookies, I would say.
I think it was
right.
Yeah, I think it was 17. I think.
Oh, 17. Okay. Yeah. Okay. God, that makes it even worse for you, but we'll get there. We also, so then I think next is me. I had a 7th place finish. My prize, if Sarah wants to come up to Westminster, this is yours if you want it. This was my prize. Just awful, just mean. I mean, I stomped on it first after I won it. But 7th place got me that prize for my strawberry chocolate chunk cookie. We should say, I forget what Brian and Grace's cookie was exactly. I don't remember, but apparently it was pretty good, fourth place. Um, then we have Mike,
Yep.
last place in our league. He had two cookies. I
Hmm.
think he was the only person to enter two, and neither of them finished top seven. Somewhere between 7 and 17. Mike's two cookies.
Yeah.
One of them was a strawberry cookie, and I forget. I don't know what the other one was. And then we have you, Adam, and I want to get your reactions. You know, it's a disappointing fantasy week for you for reasons that we'll get into. But what was more disappointing, a last place cookie that you didn't even taste before you entered it,
Oh.
or missing the playoffs by 8 points?
Oh well, the cookie was just funny.
Okay.
That was just funny because I talked to Scott out there saying like, you know, what he rated mine like close in the middle, so it wasn't Scott, so it had to be Tom and Colby that rated me around dead last. No, the fantasy hurts a lot more because I actually know what I'm doing in fantasy. I don't know what I'm doing
Mm.
with a cookie, um, but
First cookie ever made
first
by you.
cookie ever made,
Yep.
last
Okay.
cookie ever made. I will announce
Mm.
that now. For prior, I am retiring from the cookie competition as a whole.
You can't
At the
don't
bottom,
give up.
at the bottom.
No,
No, no,
don't
no.
give up.
Don't be sad to see me go. Just be happy that I was here.
Oh boy.
So yeah, the
Yikes.
fantasy one
Okay.
hurt a little more because I actually believe I know what I'm doing with that. Um, but we'll get into it. But yeah, the cookie
All
party was
right.
fun. It was a great event. It was nice to see everyone that came out. It was fun.
Yeah. Okay. So now get on to the real rankings, the ones we care about, the ones that will potentially win us money. And we should say the winner of the cookie party does win $100, so that's a nice thing. The winner of this league will win considerably more than $100. Right now, Charlie is in the best position to do so with an 11-3 record. He's now won four in a row. He's just shy of 1,700 points on the season. That's good for third highest in the league. He finishes the year with that coveted number one seed and the bye in week one of the playoffs. 11-3, 2 games better than any other team in the league. So a great season for Charlie. Really just a solid roster that we'll get into when we talk about the games. Sarah finishes in second. She loses this week, drops her second in a row, but by virtue of my loss to Brian late on Monday night, she does claim the two spot with a 9-5 record there in the two spot. I finish with a loss to Brian. Again, Jamar Chase outperformed Joe Burrow by just enough to give Brian the victory. And I dropped to 8-6, finish in third place with 1,677 points and claim that three spot. Brian follows it up. He beats me this week. He gains two spots to move from 6 to 4. He finishes in the four spot. Jake, the early season favorite to win this league, has dropped, I think, like 6 of 7 or something like that. Dropped one in a row here. He did win last week, but falls a position this week with a loss into fifth place. Dustin, the highest. Sorry, Jake.
Jake's the highest
Jake is
scorer in the
actually
league.
Jake is the highest scorer in the league. Wow! So that
Yeah.
early momentum carried Jake to a points victory this season. Dustin in the sixth spot is second in points with 1,737. Both of those teams are 7-7. Both of those teams lost this week, and both of those teams fell a spot into 5 for Jake and 6 for Dustin. And Scott has perhaps the biggest miracle
Oh, for sure.
that I've seen in fantasy sort of standings towards the end of the year, needing a ton of points. He gets a ton of points. He's now the leading scorer in the league for 2 straight weeks. He puts up like 180 points. We'll get into it. Claims that 7 spot by virtue of 8 points or so over you, separating playoffs from non-playoffs. So huge victory.
Yeah.
He needed a massive point differential. He just barely got it, and he needed just about all of those 180 points into the 7 spot. So next week we're going to get Charlie on bye. We're going to get Sarah, the number 2 seed, against Scott, the number 7 seed. We're going to get me the number 3 seed, versus Dustin, my arch nemesis, who beats me more than anybody in this league in the 6th spot. And we've got Brian against Jake. So really intriguing matchups here. I don't know if you want to talk about these before we move on to
We're going to talk about
the
them at the
rest.
end. Well, we can
All
talk
right,
about them
we'll,
at the
we'll
end. Just because
touch on them a
I
little
want to
bit.
give the little bit of, and we can look at the teams as we're reviewing them, but I want to give some credence to some of the lower level teams, since this might be the last episode that they listen to. As you know, the Union Bridge Barracudas, Pasadena Plague, Owings Mills Ogres, Finksburg Freaks, and Columbia Clown College, their seasons are over. So, going over to our first matchup, you just sang his praises on the miracle comeback, but that'd be the Westminster Wonder Boys, 187.28. I'm not sure if that's a record or not.
It might be on the season. It probably is on the season,
Probably is
right?
on the season, but goes to 7-7, claims that final playoff spot with his win over the Owings Mills Ogres with 100.12 points. Starting with Scott's squad, Josh Allen, what a day in a late comeback effort against the Rams. 3 touchdowns throwing, 3 touchdowns rushing, 51 points on the day. A monster day. Gallardo here replacing Christian McCaffrey. Jordan Mason, third man up, scores 25, 15 carries, 78 yards, 2 touchdowns. Also catches 2 balls for 50 yards. Bijan Robinson, 22 carries, 92 yards, a touchdown. Also converts a 2-point conversion there. Jerry Jeudy has a good day, but, not as much as he's used to in this last couple of weeks. 5 for 6, 64, and a touchdown. Raymond McLeod, also 8 for 11, 98 yards for 12 points. Brandon Cooks with his only catch of the game with a touchdown there. Sam Laporta, 5 for 7, 54 yards. Zach Charbonnet in relief for the injured Kenneth Walker, 22 carries, 134, 2 touchdowns, 7 for 7, 59 yards. Huge day by Charbonnet. Jake Elliott has 2, and Tampa Bay's defense has 12. On the bench, it gets a little better. I mean, even still, Rashad White, 23 points. Tank Bigsby, 12 points. So even though he had some, players on bye, Terry McLaurin, Michael Pittman, still had a, record-breaking week. It could have been for the season. My leader for Scott Squad has to be Josh Allen. I mean, what a day. Anytime you score 6 touchdowns overall on the week, you're gonna lead everything. Probably one of the best quarterback, weeks I've ever seen. With the 3 rushing touchdowns, really boosts his score up. 82 yards. I mean, everything was amazing. Still the number 2 quarterback behind Lamar Jackson, but when Scott needed him the most, Josh Allen delivered.
Yeah, he did. Much to my dismay, I was hoping that maybe one of those 1 or 2 yard touchdowns would go to James Cook, who they
Yeah.
seemingly forgot about in this game. We'll talk about him probably as a loser, as a bleeder for me. But Josh Allen certainly did not bleed at all this week. He bloodied the Rams. They still lost this game,
Yeah.
42-44. High scoring game, maybe the highest scoring game of the season, perhaps, or at least up there. Probably top 3 this season. 342 passing yards, gets the 3 touchdowns, 10 carries for 82. I mean, just doing it all. I mean, he's making a late season push to be an MVP candidate this season. He's so good. He's a big quarterback. He's a mobile quarterback. He can do it on the ground. He can throw it. He can shake tacklers. He is just the total package. He's a good-looking dude too. That doesn't hurt for sure. But 51 fantasy points, as you said, one of the best quarterback efforts this season. This is just a week removed, remember, from him somehow managing to throw a touchdown and catch a touchdown on the same play, which none of us, I don't think anybody in the world has ever even thought that that's a possible situation. But as we see, for those of us, all of us who watch sports, every so often something happens in a baseball game or a football game that you've never seen before. Allen managed to do that last week, and then follows it up with just this mega game to launch Scott all the way into the playoffs. So big performance, and again, needed every bit of it.
Basically. If you had to pick a bleeder on Scott's squad, who would it be?
Well, boy, lots of really good performances here. I mean, I guess it's Brandon Cooks, but he did score a touchdown.
Yeah,
I think you initially thought that was the margin. Maybe at one point that was maybe a scoring change made it so that Cooks's 6.8 fantasy points wasn't the only sort of margin for you that didn't make the only difference there, but
yeah,
just catches one ball for a 3-yard touchdown. Not very involved in the offense here in the game against
yeah,
Cincinnati. Is returning from injury, right? This was his second game back after a lengthy absence. Just not very involved in the game plan. So not a whole lot else to talk about.
yeah.
Even the bench performers, all of them scored in double digits, except for the two players on bye. But to do that without Terry McLaurin, who was on bye this week, to do it with, these running backs that spends $40 on Garendo, he gets 25 points. We'll see next week. Maybe we'll talk about it towards the end of the show. But Charbonnet, if a big question whether Walker comes back next week. If he doesn't, Charbonnet continues to be a great option. Question on Garendo next week. He's questionable right now. He did come out of that game banged up. Does fortunately have Rashad White and Tank Bigsby. 17 carries this week for White, 18 carries for Bigsby. So both of those are viable options to add to Bijan Robinson, who will, of course, be in the starting lineup.
Right, for sure. So, yeah, huge week for Scott, and it gets him into the playoffs. I mean, no other way than just having that huge week at 7-7. But let's go over to Alex's team. Probably one of the last times we'll talk about his squad this year. 100 points this week, 5-9 on the season. I think that me and you can pat ourselves on the back to say that this was not a talented squad, or at least we didn't like the talent on this team coming out of the draft. So I think we can kind of give ourselves a pat on the back for that. But going through his team here, Geno Smith starting in place of C.J. Stroud. Only scores 13 points, 1 touchdown, 233 yards to the air. Jahmyr Gibbs, 15 carries, 43 yards. Does catch a touchdown in this one, 6 receptions. Jaylen Warren? Yeah, Jaylen Warren starts him in a kind of a pinch here with a couple people on bye. 9 carries, 47 yards, 2 for 5, 25 yards to the air. DJ Moore doesn't really do anything, 6 for 8, 49 yards. Amon-Ra, quiet kind of day, 5 for 6, 43. Darnell Mooney, 6 for 7, 142 for 17 points. David Njoku, 7 catches, 42 yards, and a touchdown. Nick Chubb, just kind of muddling around, 11 carries, 48 yards. Hungwei Koo has 5, and Philadelphia's defense also has 5. On the bench, nothing really to talk about. Most of the team on bye other than Kareem Hunt, who does very little. But my leader, I guess the final leader for Alex's squad this year is going to be Darnell Mooney. Shockingly, wide receiver number 13.
Yeah.
I mean, has a nice day here, has 7 targets, 142 yards. He's kind of that second, wide receiver there, with Drake London being in there as well. But yeah, just an overall very good season. He was picked in the 15th round by Alex, so good on him for seeing that, and ends at least the regular season as the 13th ranked overall wide receiver.
Yeah, really impressive. I mean, look, maybe we should have seen something like this coming for somebody on the Falcons. I mean, we knew Drake London had a chance, but with Kirk Cousins there, he's a gunslinger, and the guy is a veteran, and maybe looking back in hindsight, it was inevitable that he was going to find another target. I mean, Pitts was as up and down as he always is, but maybe it wasn't so unlikely that a second wide receiver. I don't know that we ever talked about one or thought about one prior to the season, but it did turn out to be Mooney. Remember, this was a guy that was, I think, a fairly high draft pick by the Bears.
I mean, I don't have those stats. He's been in the league for 4 years, so.
Okay, so not really. I mean, he was the 24th receiver taken in the draft. I don't see what year, but yeah, round 5. So
Yeah.
not like a hugely drafted guy, but a guy that I think the Bears really liked at one point, and their offense didn't really ever get things together when Mooney was there. But he's seemingly, putting together a nice little career with the Falcons here with Kirk Cousins at quarterback.
Yeah, I mean, I think the feel of him and why he fell on the draft board so much is just because everyone expects. I don't know why we keep on expecting this to happen, but we expect that Kyle Pitts is going to take over that number 2 role there in Atlanta. It just doesn't happen every year. It just doesn't happen. So I think that's kind of why he fell. He's kind of an afterthought after Drake London as well. Wasn't really sure how the offense is going to go. You still have Bijan. He's going to get his touches and everything like that. So. But after round 12, you just start taking stabs, and this was one of the better stabs that Alex had after the draft. Who is your bleeder? Final bleeder for Alex this year.
I don't want to talk about Nick Chubb because we've talked about him in previous weeks. He went up against a Pittsburgh defense that was really good in this one and had a down day. I want to just kind of mention other guys that we've highlighted a little bit for different reasons here, and it's the other 2 receivers.
Yeah.
Amon-Ra St. Brown, 5 for 6, 43 yards, kind of pedestrian, but it was his 3rd straight kind of down week. I mean, by all means, he's a great receiver. He's still number 3 on the season. He's had plenty of huge performances, but down the stretch, he's not been so good. He hasn't had a double-digit game in 3 straight weeks. 7 fantasy points, 7.8 is his lowest since week 8. It's his 2nd lowest on the season. He now has 3 straight games where he doesn't reach 8 targets, which for Amon-Ra St. Brown, that is kind of unusual. So 3 straight games against some pretty good defenses. He struggled in this one, as did DJ Moore. I mean, 6 for 8, 49 yards. Again, you're right around 8 fantasy points. But this was a guy that we talked about with some concern, and I know specifically I mentioned the fact that this Bears offense, you just cannot trust Caleb Williams and this offense from week to week. They continue to be the biggest kind of up and down offense in the NFL. They can look really good and things are turning around for them. Caleb Williams, the rookie, is putting things together, and then they go out and have a day like this, and the commentators come out talking like, Caleb has no wherewithal, no idea about game flow, and just not good field recognition. And so DJ Moore, unfortunately, 8 targets, that's great, but doesn't do very much with them against a fairly good pass defense for the Niners.
Yeah, it's funny. So talking next year, right? I could see where DJ Moore might fall a little farther than what he should. I think Caleb Williams will be better next year. Now, he might not be a good fantasy option. You still got the quarterback sophomore slump kind of looming over his head. But he might be one of these players, like a Cortland Sutton, where you can get in the 7th or 8th round, 9th round, where, he just explodes and has a top 10 wide receiver fantasy year. I could see that for sure happening, especially if Keenan Allen leaves. I'm not sure he's gonna make it through the all season. They might cut him, things like that. So he could be an interesting name to watch in 2025.
For sure.
Okay, but Alex at 5-9 did not make the playoffs, and good luck next year.
Mission failed. We'll get him next time.
Okay, so going over to our next matchup, and that's going to be the Columbia Clown College getting their win with a huge point victory here. 162.32 to go 4-10 on the season against a playoff team, Pikesville Pink Pony Club, 93.86, 7-7 on the season. Starting with Mike's squad, Jared Goff has a fine day, throws 41 times, 283, 3 touchdowns, 1 interception. Aaron Jones, we talk about the old men wide receivers, they are old men running backs. They delivered this week. Aaron Jones, 13 carries, 73 yards and a touchdown. James Conner, 18 carries, 90 yards, and does catch a touchdown in their loss against Seattle. Tyreek Hill, 10 for 14, 115 and a touchdown. Quentin Johnson actually catches 5 balls in this one, 48 yards and a touchdown. Marvin Harrison has a down game, 4 for 8, 49 yards. Travis Kelce, 5 for 6, 45 yards for 7 points. Jordan Addison, my goodness, 8 for 12, 133 and 3 touchdowns. Myers with 12, and Seattle's defense with 7. A lot of people on bye on his bench. The only one that wasn't was Travis. I think his name's Travis Homer. Whoa, everything just froze. Hold on. There we go. I think his name. Not that it matters, but you know, leader has to be Jordan Addison here. Now wide receiver number 16. You know, it's been a very up and down season for him. He's had big games. He's had lull games. Last 4, though, 13, 26, 7, and 35. It seems like all the attention goes to Justin Jefferson, which kind of opens up some things for other pass catchers in that offense. And he really delivered in this one. His best game of the season, 3 touchdowns, 8 catches, 133.
Yeah, and I'm a little bit disappointed in myself for not thinking about drafting him more. I mean, I had him on one or two teams last year and was so impressed with him and watched a lot of him and paid attention when he was making plays on red zone. I liked him as a player, and he was a real fantasy contributor. He was probably one of the better rookie wide receivers last season.
Yeah. Well, Jefferson missed a lot of time last year as well. I do believe.
I think so, but I think Addison was still good when Jefferson was on the field. I think.
Well, let me just look at last year just to see how many games Jefferson missed. I think he missed. Yeah, he missed from week 6 to week 14. So he didn't miss a lot of time. Yeah.
Okay, well, let's see. I mean, when he was playing last year, Addison, week 1, 14, week 2, 14, week 3, 8. Looks like he missed, didn't have anything in week 4, and then a 15 points. So of those 5 or so weeks, I mean, he had double digits in 3 of them. So, he ended up with, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 touchdowns last year in his rookie season. So, it was a guy I liked having last year, and I didn't even think about him this year. He had a little bit of a legal thing hanging over his head. Mike ends up drafting.
You had Kirk Cousins leaving, so
True.
it wasn't Sam Darnold to begin the season. It was going to be J.J. McCarthy, which
True.
probably hurts his value as well. So that's probably why he fell a little bit. It fell to the 8th round this year.
He did, yeah. That's fair. Going around the guys of like McConkey and Coleman, Deontay Johnson, Christian Watson. So maybe that's the right range. It's just a guy that I hadn't considered. But just, I think next year, this is a guy who's going to probably get picked around, at least a round or 2 higher. You got to think, I mean, he's 16 on the season. He missed 2 games. So, he's probably even closer to like top 12, assuming he's healthy all those games. Proving in that offense that there's multiple weapons that can be fantasy relevant.
For sure. Now, who is the bleeder for Mike's squad?
Leader this week. Let's go with, not a whole lot. I mean, a great week for Mike. I mean, we talked about 180 for Scott. 162 is not too shabby.
No.
I guess we have to finish the year because this is another guy who we've talked about in previous shows and where his value is next year was Marvin Harrison Jr., the rookie this season. Kind of an up and down first season, I would say. Definitely had a lot of great outings. Gets 8 targets this week, following up on 12 from last week. So the target numbers have, been good of late, but just 4 for 8, 49 yards. Didn't get into the end zone. They've been using him on shorter targets. His yards per target has been under 8 the last 3 games. It's been as high as 15 or 16 yards per target. So I don't know. I mean, what do we think about Marvin Harrison next year? I know we've talked about it, but where do you think? Where are you at?
I'm at 5th or 6th round. The problem is, it's not with his talent. He is very talented. Sure, he's raw. It's his first season in the NFL. The problem is Kyler Murray. Kyler Murray refuses to throw the deep ball. And that's where Marvin Harrison kind of thrives. That's where he thrives in college. My point with that is also, I mean, he's throwing Trey McBride, 12 targets a game, and he's only getting like 87 yards. So that just kind of shows you that he's looking for those short, intermediate passes. He's not great with the long ball. At least he doesn't trust Marvin Harrison enough at this point to trust him with the long ball. It's just very up or down. And I think, his struggles this year is really going to change the fantasy landscape about, because he went in the second round. I mean, you have to be a top, 10, 12 wide receiver to go that high in fantasy football drafts. I think that's going to change kind of the perception of how wide receivers, when they come into the league, maybe let's not draft them that high just because of the unknowns. You don't know how they're going to fit in the offense and how they're really going to work with the quarterback that they're going to. Good? Yes?
Yep.
Cool.
Yep.
All right, so let's go over to the Pikesville Pink Pony Club. 7-7 on the season, makes the playoffs, as we mentioned before. Aaron Rodgers had to do a spot start for, I'm pretty sure it was Lamar. 27-39, 339, 1 touchdown, 17 points. Totally respectable day. DeAndre Swift, 14 carries, 38 yards for only 4.5 points. Kenneth Walker was out of this one. I don't know if this was a strategy by Dustin or if he was a late scratch, because Dustin was pretty much going to make it into the playoffs no matter what. But hasn't been in the lineup, scores 0, doesn't play in this one. Justin Jefferson, 7 for 7, 132, and 2 touchdowns, 28 points. Drake London, 5 for 10, 70, 9 points. Starts Keenan Allen here, 3 for 5, 30 points, 4.5 points. Brock Bowers, 3 for 5, 49 yards. Adam Thielen, 9 for 11, 102. Very good day here. Cameron Dicker, 5 points, and Green Bay with 2. On the bench, he picks the wrong Bears wide receiver once again. Rome Odunze catches 2 touchdowns in this one. My leader for this squad is going to be someone we haven't really talked about this year. That's going to be Adam Thielen.
Mm-hmm.
Very interesting kind of player to look down the stretch here. Look at his matchups. Dallas, Arizona, Tampa Bay, Atlanta. No one really scares you there. He seems to be very trusted with Bryce Young. He's looking for him. He's probably the most trusted wide receiver on that squad. Sure-handed, lots of targets. 3 of his last 4 have been over 10 targets. Coming back at the right time for Dustin, just another piece he can add to his arsenal, and, by all accounts, can really trust.
Yeah, go cut the tape of me talking about him a few weeks ago. Maybe when Dustin picked him up as sort of an interesting pickup. I think I had mentioned this, especially in light of Deontay Johnson getting traded to the Ravens. They were going to need somebody to catch passes there. And, hey, it makes total sense. If you have a young quarterback that you're trying to develop, you need a veteran wide receiver who has good hands, who can be a bit of a possession receiver, almost function as like a high-volume tight end that you can just trust. Adam Thielen has done that and been that in the league for many, many, many years. It was actually his leaving Minnesota that opened up a spot for Addison to be a number 2. So what do you think when Thielen, he's a veteran, but he's now really one of the only reliable pass catchers for a bad offense that's going to be trailing most games. In Philadelphia, they actually kept this game close, and the reason that they did, he was a big part of it. 9 for 11, 100 yards, his second straight game of double-digit targets, second straight game right around 100 yards. Doesn't score in this one, but still puts up 14 points against a very good Eagles defense. So definitely, a startable commodity. You wonder, is he going to get the start for Dustin? Is he going to sneak into one of the playoff lineups here? I guess that'll largely might depend on Ken Walker's health.
I think you got to put him in for Keenan Allen, at least for this week. Ahead of him for the weeks going forward, you got to trust him more than Keenan Allen and Rome Odunze. You just don't know which one it's going to be each and every week. And you brought up a good point. With these mid-tier wide receivers, not talking about the high-tier ones, you're drafting them, they're talented, they're going to get their looks, whatever. But these mid-tier guys, when you're deciding which one you're going to pick, you kind of look at their teams and seeing how much passing situations they're going to be in. Carolina's horrible. They're going to be behind a lot. That means that he's going to get more opportunities, more targets, and that's what you like to see out of your wide receiver 3. If your wide receiver 3 can get 11 targets each game, look out, because Dustin could be a very scary team to face in the playoffs. But who is the bleeder?
Later this week, well, other than Ken Walker being out, missed this game. Dustin was out gallivanting, international man of mystery across the world. I think he's in Slovakia or something this week, so maybe the time zone got him. But Walker, gets the start and misses this game. DeAndre Swift, I think, in the same reason we talked about DJ Moore here. Swift has now had 3 straight down games. His volume has dipped the last 4 games. His yards have dipped the last 3 games. He doesn't have 40 yards rushing in either of the last 3 games. And this coming week, he's going to be at Minnesota, a team that held him to 13 carries for 30 yards just a couple weeks ago. So it's kind of interesting. In weeks 12 and 13, 8 points, 8.4 points, Minnesota and Detroit. Guess what he has in week 15 and 16? Minnesota and Detroit. Those divisional games late in the season, similar to Pittsburgh, playing all those late divisional games. So 2 teams that he struggled with in like the last couple weeks, he now goes to Minnesota. So I just wonder, does that concern you given his recent history here against these teams?
Yeah, I mean, it definitely does concern me, but unfortunately, Dustin doesn't really have many options left. It's basically going to be between him and Ramondre Stevenson. Who do you play here? Stevenson is next. 3, Arizona, Buffalo, Chargers. Not a lot of teams where they're probably going to be pretty close. Now, I know Ramondre Stevenson historically has caught the ball a ton, but not this year. So it's kind of just whose talent do you trust more, really? And I think you just kind of have to go with DeAndre Swift going forward.
Yeah, the weird part I do want to mention, you mentioned the 2 Bears receivers here, Keenan Allen and Rome Odunze. For what it's worth, again, I just mentioned that the Vikings and the Lions are really tough defenses, but from the passing game perspective, they're tough. From the running game. But in terms of against wide receivers, both of these teams are good matchups for wide receivers. So some interesting decisions that Dustin will have to make if he decides to flip the coin and pick one of these Bears. They have a pretty good shot in a game against either Minnesota or Detroit, 2 double-digit win teams that probably are going to have leads. It's just going to be interesting to see because I think some of these decisions are pretty close.
I totally agree. But at 7-7, he is in. So we will be talking about him for good or bad next week. Going to our third matchup of the week, that's going to be yours truly, ending my season here, going 7-7, 131.60, 127.82 for Jake, 7-7 as well. I kind of get some sort of a revenge on Jake for last year, ending my undefeated streak, but it doesn't matter. He's in the playoffs and I am not. But let's go over to my starting roster. I had to start Brock Purdy for Jaden Daniels being out, 325, 2 touchdowns, 22-point day. That perfectly fine there. Rico Dowdle, 18 carries, 131, 1 for 2, 10 yards. Has a nice day here. Would have been nice to get in the end zone, but has a solid day there against Cincinnati. Tony Pollard as well, 21 carries, 102, 2 catches, 13 points. Solid day as well. Mike Evans was injured throughout the weeks. Kind of has a slow day here, 4 for 5, 69 yards. 8.9 points. Malik Neighbors, 10 targets, 79 yards, and a 2-point conversion for 12 points. Juwan Jennings, 7 for 8, 90 yards, 2 touchdowns against Chicago. Trey McBride, 7 catches, 70 yards for 10. Calvin Ridley, 7 for 12, 59 yards. Jason Bates, is it Jason? I hope it's Jason Bates. Jake Bates. Jason Bates is I don't know, something. But Jake Bates, 11, and Minnesota with 4. On the bench, nothing really happened. Tyler Algier, who was a pickup, has a touchdown in this one. Nothing else really to talk about there. My leader, and I don't think we talked about him maybe a little bit, but Juwan Jennings, he was a free agent pickup twice for me, actually. I had to drop him to pick up Ezekiel Elliott to beat you, and then I picked him up again. I paid $0 for it, but now wide receiver number 18 had a 24-point day here, 2 touchdowns. Probably the most trusted receiver there in San Francisco for Brock Purdy, doing it, and really added some value for me with some injuries and things like that I had to go through.
Yeah, really interesting story. And the kind of question, we've been kind of talking a little bit about some of these guys in the context of next year. And this 49ers offense is going to be one of the most interesting ones to watch. Actually found just as you were talking, a quick article that came out today on looks like a 49ers sportsillustrated.com page, but basically laying out the case that the 49ers did something that some of the other teams around the NFL have done recently, in which they restructured Deebo Samuel's contract to make him a potential post-June 1st release the following year by quote unquote a creative restructure of his contract this past September. So without getting into the details of it, it seems like they made a move anticipating potentially that he might be a cut. This given perhaps their long-term deal for
Brandon Ayuk.
help me out. Brandon Ayuk, correct, and their perhaps confidence that Jawan Jennings is really good.
Yeah.
So could Jawan Jennings be the number one receiver for Brock Purdy in this offense next year? I think there's a pretty good chance that he could functionally become that. So, I think he's going to be pretty highly drafted next year. Clearly a ton of talent. Just has been really good in his limited time this season.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's probably a little closer. I think it's 1A in terms of Ayuk and Jennings. Just because, when looking at it right now, Ayuk is out, obviously, torn ACL, but Deebo Samuel doesn't operate as a traditional wide receiver. They like to use him out of the backfield, throw him screen passes, things of that nature. Where Brandon Ayuk is more of that traditional wide receiver that, they like to run routes, deep routes, things of that nature that Jawan Jennings actually does really well as well. So it will just be kind of interesting how drafters really view the two. Who do they trust more? Who do they, the talent-wise, who do they like more? Yeah, but, I mean, he's been great, and he's done really well this season. Kind of came out of nowhere, being that third wide receiver to start the season, and now really the true number one wide receiver on the squad. Okay, so who's the bleeder?
Two guys I want to just mention, Mike Evans and Malik Neighbors, two guys that have been crucial players on your team throughout the season. Both of them fail to get into the end zone. Some of the fears that we had about Neighbors in terms of his efficiency, his target efficiency, not his targets, but his target efficiency, and his lack of touchdowns, the Giants' general lack of being able to put together an NFL offense. For having double-digit targets in most weeks this season. I mean, his targets are insane. He probably leads the league in targets for wide receivers on a per-game basis. He missed a couple games with injury, but I'd venture a guess to say he's up there at the top with targets. But only 3 touchdowns on the year, and none of those since week 3. So I think from a fantasy point perspective, he left so many points on the table. That whole Giants offense did. Speaking of leaving points on the board this week, Mike Evans, just 4 for 5, 69 yards. He also does not get into the end zone here. Tough matchups these last couple weeks. Teams that play the wide receivers fairly well, believe it or not, despite, Giants, Carolina, Vegas. He struggled against New York, and he struggled a little bit against Vegas in this week, but just 4 for 5. If one of those guys maybe gets a touchdown, and if something breaks your way, that you could be talking about another game. But to have those two guys on your squad and not get a touchdown from either one of them is probably a little bit frustrating.
Yeah, and I totally agree. I'm going to go on a tiny bit of a rant here, but I am proud of the way that I handled the season, actually, to get back to 500. Chris McCaffrey only played 4 games this season. No other round one pick missed that amount of time. To still get at 7-7 on the season, I mean, I had to do a lot of creative things, make some free agency moves, things like that. But to get to 7-7, even though I still missed the playoffs, hey, that helps my career win total a little bit for a team that really shouldn't perform this well with missing McCaffrey, for that period of time.
True, and Chris Olave, we shouldn't
Yeah.
we should mention him as well. I believe second round pick, missed 4 games but left 2 other games early. So I'm sure he was in your lineup for those games that he left early with -1 points in week 6 and 1.8 in week 9. So in some respects, we've talked about it, how players that play and get hurt are sometimes even worse than guys that because you can just sit them if they don't play. But it's those guys that try to play and have to leave the game for whatever reason. So I agree. I mean, nicely done by you, Calvin Ridley. You're welcome for giving you the opportunity to pick him up this season. But yeah, definitely much to be proud of for the run that you made to come very, very close to a playoff appearance.
Okay, but let's go over to a actual playoff team, and that'd be Jake. I think we stated that he was the highest points scored on the regular season anyway. Did have didn't actually have any bye week problems, but starts Justin Herbert here, which I kind of found kind of surprising. Only throws for 1 touchdown. It does leave this game, comes back in. Not really the same, though, 213. 13 points. Saquon Barkley, down game for him, I guess. 20 carries, 124, no touchdowns, but does get a 2-point conversion. Alvin Kamara also has kind of a down game. 17 carries, 44 yards, 5 for 5, 35 yards to the air. Garrett Wilson, 7 catches, 114, 14 points. Devontae Adams, 109, touchdown, 21 points, 9 for 11. Jalen Reed, has a big old 0 there against Detroit. K. Dotton has 8 points. Tyron Tracy, 16 carries, 45 yards and a touchdown. 10 targets, which is kind of interesting, for 38 yards. Sanders has 16, and the Pittsburgh defense has 11. On the bench, Jameson Williams has a nice day. What's his name? Jawan Johnson, also kind of interesting there with a touchdown. My leader has to be Davante Adams. I know we've crushed him so much during this, the season, how he hasn't, really lived up to expectations through going to the Jets, but has his best day as a Jet in this one. 11 targets, 9 catches, 109, and a touchdown. Looking at his next 3, Jacksonville, the Rams, and Buffalo, 2 of those 3 teams were just involved in a 50-point game each. So defense left to be desired, and Jacksonville is Jacksonville. Is Davante Adams probably the make or break player for Jake going into this playoff run?
I suppose so. I mean, I guess both of those players. It's really tough because it's been kind of feast or famine for some of these guys. You've kind of run the gamut here of Wilson and Adams, playing well with each other, playing poorly with each other. They seem to both be, contributing here. You mentioned the targets, 10 or more targets in 4 of his last 5 games for Adams, and Wilson likewise 10 or more in 3 of his last 5 games as well. So the volume seems to be there between those two. It's really the touchdowns and the efficiency for these guys. I mean, maybe towards the end of the season, Aaron Rodgers is starting to get on the same page. A little too late for Jets fans, but 9 for 11, the efficiency there with Adams seems to be returning a bit. He just can't have a week where those 2 guys both struggle. I mean, he needs one of those guys to get into the end zone, and he needs one of those guys to get 100 yards. This week, 1 touchdown was to Adams, and both guys over 100 yards, and Jake still lost. So he really needs both of those guys to combine for at least, 20 points at least moving forward, if not many more than that.
Well, I would say just the good news there is that at least two of the three defenses that they're going to be, or teams that they're going to be playing, give up a lot and can score very fast as well. The Rams can score, Buffalo can score, so it could be some high-scoring games where Devontae Adams and Garrett Wilson both get their looks and both can go over 100 yards. Who was the bleeder?
Well, the mysterious disappearance. Has anybody seen Jaden Reed? I mean, he disappeared in this game as quickly as the United Healthcare shooter did. They ended up finding him a week later. Jake is hoping that they find Jaden Reed a week later for the Packers. Definitely, I don't know what happened in this game. None of the stat lines make sense other than the fact that Josh Jacobs scored 3 touchdowns rushing, and Jordan Love did not have a good game. The Packers put up 31 points, but it wasn't because of Love and it wasn't because of Reed. It was because of Jacobs this week. Reed finishes 0 for 1, 0 fantasy points, and agreed that it was an interesting decision to start Herbert for Jake, a Packers fan, to kind of restrain himself from throwing the Packer in there on a Thursday night game. I believe this was the Thursday night game, right? This was, yeah. Probably, I'd have to say that Jake was probably looking at just the number of passes. Herbert, definitely averaging more passes per game, equating that with opportunities for fantasy points. It didn't really turn out to matter one way or the other, but definitely an interesting decision there. And Jaden Reed, really, I don't know what happened. It wasn't a snap percentage thing, I don't believe.
No, it kind of was.
Oh, was it?
It was only 50% snap carry. It's 50%
50%, yeah. Interesting.
So, looking back at week 9 when they first played Detroit, he went for 113. It could have just been a thing where Detroit was like, we're going to take him away and make sure he doesn't hurt us and let some of these other guys try to beat us. So, could have been that. But yeah, it's just, he's hard to trust because it's hard to figure him out because he can really go off, as we saw in week 1, some of week 4 as well. Even week 13 where he had 18 points, he could really go off, or he can just disappear. And, with the fantasy playoffs, you really can't have a guy like this disappear in your wide receiver 3 spot. It'll be interesting to see if Jake kind of goes away from him for more of a, more consistent person. Jameson Williams is the one name I'm thinking of. Just a little more consistent there in that wide receiver 3 spot.
Yeah, the volume's a problem. I mean, 3 or fewer targets in 3 of the last 4 games. Like, that's really, really hard to trust. Doesn't have 30 yards in 4 straight games. Like, running into a dry spell at the worst time for Jake right now.
Yep. But at 7-7, still in. And as you said, second highest point. So definitely a very dangerous squad with Saquon Barkley and Alvin Kamara leading the charge for Jake into the playoffs. But let's go to our next game, and that's going to be our league leader in wins. That'd be Charlie at 11-3, 124.18 to 87.80 for the Finksburg Freaks, 5-9. Starting with Charlie's squad, Sam Darnold, what a day. 5 touchdown passes, 347, 34 points in that shootout against Atlanta. Has to start, now we get into the things where you have to start everyone's leftovers. Kenneth Gainwell scores 4. Amir Abdul scores 0.3. Jackson Smith and Jigba, 5 for 5, 82 and a touchdown. Cooper Kupp as well, 5 for 8, 92 and a touchdown in that high-scoring game at Buffalo. Jacoby Myers, 7 for 10, 67 yards, 10 points. Jonnu Smith continues his tear, 44 yards and a touchdown. Devontae Smith also scores in this one for 37 yards. Chris Boswell has 11, and the Rams defense has 5. On the bench, he had Derrick Henry on bye, Jonathan Taylor on bye, Javonte Williams on bye, Nico Collins on bye, and still manages to win this game. But my leader has to be Sam Darnold, now quarterback number 7. I don't think really anyone really expected that. Very efficient day, 22 for 28, 347, 5 touchdowns. By far his best game of the season. And I think the biggest question for Charlie going into the playoffs, doesn't have to worry about next week because of the bye, but who does he go with here? Sam Darnold or Matthew Stafford? They both, they both have their down games. They both have good games. Looking at the schedule here, not going to have to worry about week 15, but 16 is Seattle, 17 is Green Bay for Sam Darnold. Matthew Stafford is going to be the Jets and Arizona. So just going to be kind of hard to figure out, and it could determine if he wins in the playoffs or not.
It's really hard not to start Darnold right now. I mean, in his last 4 games, he has 11 touchdowns and 0 interceptions. Like, that's pretty damn good. QB2 on the week this week. His volume is consistent, typically high 20s, low 30s in terms of passing attempts. And as you said, week 15, Chicago, that's a tough matchup. Charlie won't have to worry about it. At Seattle, kind of middle of the road maybe matchup there. I'd be hard pressed to sit Darnold right now, but we'll see where things stand after next week. Stafford, nice game, 20 points. He also in his last 4 games, 10 touchdowns, 0 interceptions. So both of these guys are good options. It looks like Stafford has maybe a little bit tougher line of matchups here. The Jets in Week 16, although they lost C.J. Mosley to put him on season-ending IR. So I don't know. It's going to be a tough decision, but Charlie has made pretty good decisions this year, so I trust him to make those.
For sure. I mean, he's made it consistently thus far this season. Let's hope that or at least for his own sake, that his luck continues, just like his luck of submitting a ice cream sandwich to the cookie party. All right, so who is our bleeder?
Well, it's not fair, but we'll talk about the 2 running backs. Obviously, 2 roster pickups this week. Dropped Cam Akers, dropped Ray Davis, picked up Amir Abdullah, picked up Kenneth Gainwell. Abdullah, probably a good pickup. Despite only 1 carry, I thought it was as good a pick as any. It ended up being another Raiders backup running back who sort of took the lead there at Tampa Bay. But, Gainwell ends up catching a couple balls, getting 4 fantasy points. Can't complain. You get the victory. Knew that we were questioning whether Charlie was even going to address those positions. He does end up addressing them. Wouldn't have mattered. Charlie plows through with a very easy victory here, despite the insane bye situation. This team is just scary when fully healthy, and all of his players. And imagine like J.K. Dobbins is on IR, and I think gonna miss. Is he gonna miss the rest of this? He's missed the rest of the season, won't he? Or is he gonna be back?
I have no idea.
I don't know either.
But I mean, even so, you're starting Derrick Henry, Jonathan Taylor, and then you're throwing Nico Collins in there probably for Jacoby Myers. You still have Devontae Smith at the flex spot, which is more than enough at the flex spot. You have to believe.
Yeah, and by the way, Myers, 10 or more targets in 3 straight games, has Atlanta, Jacksonville, and New Orleans. That's bright green in 15, 16, and 17. So, I don't know what you do with that information. Does he get a start over Devontae Smith? Do you want 6 targets from Devontae Smith, which is what you've got from him recently, or do you want 10 targets for Jacoby Myers? There's a decision to be made there, I think.
Yeah, for sure. But let's go over to the losing squad here. That'd be the Finksburg Freaks, 5-9 on the season to end his season. Starts Patrick Mahomes, has a Patrick Mahomes kind of day. Doesn't make mistakes, but doesn't make too many plays. 210 and a touchdown. Not really on 37 attempts, which is kind of high for that low of yardage. Starts Alexander Madison. He's out of this one. I think he was a late scratch. Travis Etienne scores 9 points, does most of his work at receiving, 4 for 4, 50 yards. Brian Thomas Jr., 8 for 12, 86 yards for 12 points. T. Higgins, 2 for 5, 23 yards. Nothing really happening there. DK Metcalf, 4 for 6, 49 yards. Pat Freiermuth, 48 yards and a touchdown. Nick Westbrook-Ikhine only has 2 targets in this one catch for 19 yards. Brandon Aubrey has 10, and San Francisco has 17. On the bench starts Patrick Mahomes over Tua. Tua has a nice day for 23 points. Gus Edwards also has 9. Looking at this team, 5-9. There's probably a lot of mistakes to be made. In the draft, some people didn't pan out. Patrick Mahomes, T. Higgins are 2 of the names I'm thinking of. But one of the best picks of the draft and my leader for his squad is Brian Thomas Jr. Now the 9th ranked overall wide receiver, was picked in the 9th round by Tom. So good on him there. Really the only option there in terms of receiving for Jacksonville, and it doesn't matter if it's Mac Jones or Trevor Lawrence. He seems to just score points. 12 targets, 8 catches, 86 yards. Does have 6 touchdowns on the season. So very good pick there in the 9th round for Tom.
Absolutely, and similar to a lot of guys we've talked about, double-digit targets in 2 straight games for him. Jacksonville, very, very bad team. This is probably, one of their best, most promising young players that they've had there. Now, we know the history of good, promising young players in Jacksonville. Hopefully, fortunes change for Thomas because he is really an electric receiver. 3 straight games of 11 or more fantasy points, 3 top 30 performances. He is a locked-in fantasy starter at this point in the season. Still, because it's the Jags, still capable of having some down games here and there. But against a very good Tennessee passing defense, plays 80% of the snaps and has his largest target share on the season with 12. So impressive rookie. We knew coming out of the draft, both of us talked about the risks that Tom takes with young first-year players. And I was actually re-listening to the draft recap show to prepare us for our season-ending episode at some point. And we really liked that Tom took those chances. In fact, we both liked Brian Thomas in the 9th much more than Xavier Worthy, who was his 7th round pick.
Yeah.
We actually said Thomas deserved to be taken before Worthy because of how good of a camp Thomas had and because of some potential other weapons in Kansas City for Worthy. So Thomas does, in fact, have a really good rookie season. Worthy doesn't quite live up to expectations, I think, but Thomas turned out to be a really great 9th round pick, given the other guys that were taken in that range.
Totally agree. Who was the bleeder?
Well, Madison
Don't go with that.
plays and gets a 0. Even though there were wait, so
He didn't play.
no, he didn't play, but did Tom have him? Did he?
An auto sub?
Oh, that's right. He was right. He was designated as the replacement for
Breece Hall.
Who was it? Breece Hall, right? And both of those guys don't end up playing. Unfortunate for Tom there, but the wide receivers here, DK Metcalf and T. Higgins combined for about 10 fantasy points. Metcalf now for the Seahawks has now had 3 straight weeks under 9 fantasy points. His sort of touchdowns have not been, I think, where Tom would have hoped that they were at this point in the season. Just 3 on the year. Doesn't have one in his last 4 games. Jackson Smith and Jigba has really come on for this team, resulting in just generally lower output for Metcalf here late in the year. Unfortunate that also corresponds in this week with T. Higgins going 2 for 5. Jamar Chase once again just dominated targets there. Despite having double digits in his last 2 games, T. Higgins winds up with just 5 this week at Dallas. A matchup that you probably felt pretty good about Higgins in that matchup. He struggles. So those 2 guys who you're relying on to lock down your starting lineup. end up struggling, and this team ends a disappointing season. This was a team that we both, I think, liked a lot. I certainly did coming out of the draft, but recent performances, this is the type of performance that's enough to make a man drink, and Tom is going to be doing that one way or the other because he does give us the final, or hopefully will give us the final punishment here on the season with an 87-point disappointment in Week 14.
Well, Josh also owes us a punishment as well.
Oh, Joe, from last week, right?
Yeah. So
Yeah.
we'll have two there. My question for you, just to round out Tom's team here, next year, would you rather have T. Higgins or DK Metcalf? Now Higgins, stats are skewed. He's missed 5 games. So, and DK Metcalf, he's missed 2. So yeah, who would you rather have?
I don't know that. I don't know that T. Higgins is going to be in Cincinnati next year.
True. Well, that's assuming that he is.
If he is, I've never really been a Higgins guy, and as you know, I've traded for Metcalf in the past, so I think I'd probably still prefer Metcalf there. But it's close.
Yeah, Metcalf is on pace at least to have his worst fantasy season since his rookie season.
Yeah.
There, I mean, did miss some games, but still, just a very disappointing with picking in the 4th round. Now, wide receiver number 31.
Yeah, 4th round pick this season.
Yep.
Higgins was taken in the 6th.
Okay. Going to our next matchup, that is going to be the Battle of the Hugheses, the Hughes household. Josh takes this one, goes to 6-8 on the season, 123.68 to 120.22. Josh, I guess, has some bragging rights at least for this week, able to beat Sarah, who is the number 2 seed. Starting with Josh's squad, starts Jameis Winston, which, popular streaming quarterback with a lot of people on bye and a lot of people out for Josh. Scores 15 points in this one, and a tough matchup against Pittsburgh. Najee Harris, 16 carries, 53 yards, and a touchdown. Pacheco, 14 carries, 55 yards, 2 for 4, 7 points. Puka Nacua, my goodness, 14 targets, 12 catches, 162 and a touchdown, 35 points. Wan'Dale Robinson, 4 for 11, 38. DeMarcus Robinson has a big fat 0 in this one. George Kittle, 6 for 6, 151, so great day there. Jerome Ford, splitting carries with Nick Chubb, 10 carries, 28 yards, and 3 for 4, 19 through the air. Wright, the kicker for the Chiefs, has 17, and the Kansas City defense has 7. Nothing really to talk about on the bench here. My leader, and how much of a difference would Josh's season been if he had this person the entire year? Puka Nacua. With him, it seems like, with him and Cooper Kupp and Matthew Stafford, this Rams offense is completely different. His most targets on the season at 14. His most yards on the season. Scores another touchdown here. Now, wide receiver number 26. Now, mind you, he missed 5 games. It's still wide receiver number 26 there. So, a huge day. And I think that people were concerned about, a fully healthy Cooper Kupp with Puka Nacua. Who's going to get the most work? They both get the work. And he just shows it here that he's still very viable even with a healthy Cooper Kupp.
Yeah, for me, no doubt about it. The most, well, maybe some doubt, but one of the most exciting players in the NFL.
Yeah.
It's just
he is fun
he's
to
all
watch.
over the field. Like if the ball is in the air, there's a very good chance that it's going toward Puka Nacua. They use him all over the field. He can be gadgety. He can be over the middle. He can run deep routes. He's just an impressive player. Just a huge presence on the football field. I'm so excited to be able to keep him in my other league next year
I can keep
for a
him as
second
well.
year in a row. I'll be keeping Kyron Williams, Puka Nacua, and Bucky Irving in all likelihood, so I'm pretty excited about that. All for late-round picks. Nacua, 12 for 14. The targets are just incredible. We talked about the targets for Malik Neighbors. A fully healthy season for Nacua might kind of be right up there with Malik Neighbors. He's got 13 or more targets in 3 of his last 5 games, which is just silly. I'm actually going to look up targets per game um,
Leaders.
wide receiver NFL this year.
Yeah, because this podcast isn't going as long as it should.
Most targets. Okay, so interesting. Averaging. Okay, let's do it by average. Malik Neighbors, number one on a per game basis, 11 and a half targets per game. Puka Nakua, number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, seventh at 9.4 targets per game.
Yeah, I mean,
So definitely both of those guys up there.
yeah, for sure. Who is the bleeder?
Well, by the way, the other guy I just wanted to mention, sorry, I know it's going to go long, but just Kittle, what he's done is so impressive this season. I mean, is there any other tight end in the league that can have a 6 for 6 for 151? Like, his yards after the catch, his ability to run, his ability to get downfield is just so impressive. 6 for 6, 151 is not a
Tight end stat.
a tight end stat line by any stretch. But anyway, that's my other leader for you. My bleeder are going to be 2 guys named Robinson, Wan'Dale Robinson and Demarcus Robinson. With Kupp and Nakua healthy, the need for Demarcus Robinson has pretty much disappeared. He doesn't catch a pass in this game in which his team scored 44 points, 61% of the snaps against Buffalo, but does not catch his only target. And Wan'Dale Robinson is similar in keeping with our kind of disappointing Giants. The promise that he showed earlier on in the year, he has his first 5 weeks, he has not, how do I say this? His lowest point total in the first 5 weeks was 8.8. He has not hit 8.8 in any of the 8 weeks since then. So, like, and that's despite 11 targets this week, and 8 targets in week 10, and 9 targets in week 7, and 11 targets in week 6. So, like, he's had the opportunities, but similar to Neighbors, his efficiency has just been so down.
I don't think it's their
generally.
efficiency. I think it's the quarterback's efficiency.
Right. Sure. Of course. And his yards per target also is like probably lowest in the league. So frustrating for Wan'Dale Robinson, especially off to such a good start this season and just kind of, like the Giants, just have run into obstacle after obstacle this season.
Yeah, and that 6 and 8. He did lose a couple. I think he lost like 4 straight, but does get to 6 and 8 on the season, and maybe has some bragging rights in the household this week. But let's go over to the second seed here, 9 and 5 on the season, 120.22. Jalen Hurts runs a touchdown in, throws a couple touchdowns, 24 points against Carolina. Chase Brown, 14 carries, 58 yards, has a really nice catch for a touchdown against Dallas for 21 points. Devin Achane, nothing really happening on the ground, but it seems to be every single week that he saves it through the air. 6 for 7, 45, 15 points. CeeDee Lamb, 6 for 7, 93 and a touchdown. DeAndre Hopkins, 4 for 9, 32 yards and a touchdown. George Pickens out of this one. Don't know if he was a late scratch. But it says unlikely to play in week 15, so Sarah's going to need to find someone there. Evan Ingram, 4 for 6, 33 yards. David Montgomery, 14 carries, 51 yards and a touchdown, 5 for 5, 33 for 16. McLaughlin has 4, and Dallas has 3. On the bench, Baker, looking fine, but you're not going to start him over Jalen Hurts. And everyone else was on bye or hurt. My leader for her squad is going to be Chase Brown. Now running back number 12, and I think that's kind of deceiving as well because he didn't have the job fully in Cincinnati for the first half of the season, but as he's gotten the full job from week 8 on, he's scored double-digit points and seems to be a very dangerous piece in a very dangerous offense.
What could have been if my team only had Chase Brown and Rashee Rice. Oh, my gosh, I might have a bye this week had I held on to Brown and had I not had an injury to Rice. But alas, Chase Brown continues to dominate the carries for the Bengals. They don't really have anybody else. 14 carries for 58 yards. Involved in the passing game as well with 8 targets. A top 12 running back at this point in time. And this is a guy who did not have the starting job, as you said earlier in the season. He did not hit uh, basically 50% of the snaps until week 6. So for him to do what he's been doing, double-digit fantasy points in 6 straight games and 9 of his last 10, is that right? Wow, really impressive. Similar, his targets like 7. Let's see, 5 or more targets in 4 of his last 5.
Yeah.
Like that's also really impressive. So, good matchup, decent matchup next week against Tennessee. And yeah, he's looked every bit the part of a starting caliber. Um,
High wide receiver two, low or high running back two, low
I was gonna
running
say,
back one.
yeah, well, I mean, like, where does he get drafted
That's
next
what
year?
that was going to be my question to you. Where does he get drafted next year? He's drafted in the 9th round this year.
Round 3?
Whew, round 3. Huh.
I mean,
Yeah, I mean, if he's going to
unless
be the guy, unless they sign somebody else, but
he's proving that they don't really need to sign somebody
true. But they
else.
could
I mean,
draft somebody. You never know.
yeah.
Okay, who's the bleeder?
The bleeder this week. We should mention for the record that unlike earlier in the season, Sarah did not text us to ask us if we could allow her to make a substitution late after Pickens was ruled out. Didn't really have any other options. Lad McConkey was also ruled out this week. So 2 players that have been pretty big pieces for her team. Pickens unlikely to play next week. Hopefully McConkey is able to go. Otherwise, Sarah could be in a lot of trouble. But as for a true legitimate bleeder this week, let's go with, I guess, Evan Engram. 4 for 6, just 33 yards in Jacksonville. Only has 1 touchdown this year, did miss 3 games. So that kind of limited his upside. He probably is the weakest starting tight end right now for any team in the
Yeah,
Beltway Wars Invitational.
yeah.
Only 2 games of more than 10 fantasy points. So it's just been a bit of a struggle. His targets have been fine. It's just that his yards per target, his yards per catch have just been so low. Brian Robinson is the distance guy for this team. Engram sort of does his thing, but doesn't get into the end zone and doesn't really get a whole lot of yards after the catch.
And I mean, in a year that a lot of the tight ends have been very disappointing, I mean, he was tight end number 2 last year. So to go I know he's missed 4 games really, but to go from 2 to 24 is really just kind of rough. Did pick him in the 7th round, so maybe not as obviously didn't hurt her as much. Picking him in the 7th round, but just a really big fall off there. Quarterback play was worse this year than last year. Travis Lawrence being out doesn't help that at all. So just kind of disappointing for Evan Engram after, he had a really, really great season last year.
Yeah, and you mentioned the 7th round. He actually, again, listening back to the draft recap show, Evan Engram was my favorite pick on her team. I love the value. I think she waited till the end of a tier. It turns out not to have been the case, but for the record, I did like that pick when she made it.
Okay, but at 95, C2, she's looking in good shape. And we'll talk about the matchups after our last matchup of Week 14, and that would be you losing by 2 to the Cockeysville Cocks, the Westminster Warbirds, 8-6, 117.76 to 119.36. Looking at Brian's squad, Kyler Murray, fine day, throws 2 touchdowns, 32 picks. Doesn't run the ball a lot, which has been frustrating the entire year. Josh Jacobs on Thursday night, 18 carries, 66 yards, 3 touchdowns against Detroit. Has to start Trey Benson, 2 carries, 15 yards, nothing really happening there. Jamar Chase, what a day, 18 targets, 177, 2 touchdowns, 38 points. Amari Cooper has a nice day, 6 for 14, 95 yards. Deebo Samuel, 2 for 3, 22 yards. And you were talking about earlier that they might move on from him. This just doesn't look great. Not sure of his role in this offense. Tyler Kraft, 3 for 5, 41 and a touchdown. Parker Washington, 2 for 2, 15 yards. Brandon McManus has 7, and Arizona has -2. Looking on the bench, nothing really crazy. Russell Wilson has 16. My leader, I mean, we stay away from Jamar Chase. We talked about him a lot. I guess we'll just go Josh Jacobs. Well, we've talked about him a little bit, but we'll talk about him a little more. Since week 5, he's had double-digit scores. Now, running back number 6 on the season. He was drafted in the 2nd round, so good value there for Brian. Just really, really dominant year, and his snap count, earlier in the season it was 75, 52, 61. Now it's 80, 78, 80. So the usage is there. He's on the field more, and they trust him to carry the load there in Green Bay.
Yeah, he's really turned it on the second half of the season. I mean, one of the best, most reliable running backs late in the year. Playing really well. I mean, what's there more to say? We've talked about him in previous weeks. He's got, God, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 straight games of 10 or more fantasy points. Only has fewer than 10 twice. Weeks 3 and 4 only has one game on the season of less than 12 carries. So, like, this is not a guy like James Cook, who, spoiler alert, will have 6 carries in a given week. This is a guy whose workload is reliable. He's a top 5 running back in 5 of his last 6 games. Continues to be dominant in perhaps one of the hardest matchups he's had all year. He has his 3rd strongest fantasy performance against the Detroit Lions in Detroit. So huge effort for him. He's got touchdowns in 4 straight. He's got 2 3-touchdown games this season. Just really coming on at the right time for Brian.
For sure, for sure. Who was your bleeder?
Well, a couple options to pick from, but I think we need to touch on Deebo Samuel again, unfortunately. Now the number 50 wide receiver.
Yeah.
You look at Deebo Samuel, you look at number 50, you say, God, how many games did he miss? Well, he missed 1 game this season. I
think he got knocked out of week 7, but yeah, 2 games.
Oh, you're right. You did. 2 games. Okay, 2 games, but number 50. Meanwhile, we're talking about players who missed 3 or 4 games and is like a top 24 receiver, and Puka Nacua missed 6 games and it's 26. So, like, man, oh man. I mean, is there a bigger draft disappointment than Ayuk? I'm sorry, than Deebo in the Ayuk went in the 3rd round, so Deebo went also earlier in the 3rd round, 3.5.
Yeah.
So, like, a top 30 pick essentially.
Yeah.
Man.
Yeah, I think the bigger disappointment is Christian McCaffrey, but that's just me.
Well, a non-injury related. I mean,
Chris Olave.
He's missed 4 games. I mean, like, and 2 of those he played and got hurt. So I don't know, like.
Yeah, I mean, it was funny because, like, when thinking back to the draft, I was thinking, do I take Deebo or Chris Olave? I wasn't sure which one I should take, so that's very interesting.
I mean, look, here's the thing to ask. Like, okay, I gave Brian the highest grade I've ever given to you. I gave him an 8+ coming out of the draft. We both looked at his top 8 picks and said, I wouldn't have done anything differently. And just about all of, well, I mean, Samuel has been by far the biggest disappointment, but imagine if he returns, if he's even a top 24 wide receiver instead of 50.
Yeah.
You're talking about Brian as, competing for that number 1 spot.
Yeah.
Potentially. So, I don't know, really big disappointment and definitely a struggle for Brian. He's I mean, the last 3-4 weeks, wide receiver 62, 71, 94, and 55.
Yeah.
Enough said.
There's not really better options on the bench either. I mean, Vele is the only really other option you might throw in there. But that might be a bridge too far for that. But let's go over to the other side here, and that'd be you. Joe Burrow does what Joe Burrow does. 369, 3 touchdowns. I was completely wrong about him. If we're listening back on the draft recap, he is number 3 on the season. Kyron Williams, 29 carries, 87 yards, 2 touchdowns for 22 points. You decide to start Bucky Irving, and he has one of his worst games of the season. Just 2.3 points. Second worst game of the season, but he wasn't really starting at the beginning of the season. Shakir, though, 5 for 8, 106 and a touchdown, so a little bit of return in value for your Chase Brown trade. Jalen Waddle as well, 9 for 12, 99 yards, does have a 2-point conversion for 16 points. A.J. Brown, kind of a slow day, 4 for 4, 43 yards. T.J. Hawkinson still doesn't look the same there, and when you score 42, you expect a little better, but only 45 yards there. James Cook, oh my goodness, looking at that score line, you're expecting a lot more. 6 total carries, 20 yards, 2 catches, 3.9 points. Tyler Bass has 6, and New Orleans has 10. On the bench, you took my advice, and I led you astray, my friend. Chua Hubbard, 26 carries, 92 yards, and a touchdown for 18 points. It's just very interesting now because Jonathan Brooks tore his ACL again. So he is the lead back there again. And it's kind of, you're going to be playing the Bucky Irving or Chua Hubbard train. Might be a little easier if Bucky Irving's out, but yeah. So I guess my leader for your squad is going to be Shakir. Now wide receiver number 27, scores 19 points in this one. 8 targets, 5 for 106. He's kind of a weird kind of wide receiver. He's smaller and he's shifty, but he does get down the field and does catch some long passes. I mean, his yards per target was 13, so it's not like he's catching those short intermediate passes. He also goes long as well. And Josh Allen seems to be looking for him, and it's paying off for you.
Yeah, best game of the season for Shakir. Most of that, half of that yardage coming on about a 55-yard touchdown later in this game. In fact, this matchup had been tightening up between Brian and I until Shakir put me up by a pretty, what I thought was a safer margin with that big late score from Josh Allen for a 55-yard connection or so. Really impressive day. Just unfortunate that it comes, it's been the problem with this team all season is I can't seem to quite get everybody onto the same page in the same week. Shakir has his best game of the season, but James Cook and A.J. Brown and Bucky Irving gets hurt and all kinds of other disasters happening across the lineup. So if these guys can only put it on the field on the same week, that would be really lovely.
And who is your bleeder for this week? I think I know where you're going with this.
Well, Bucky Irving would be the easy one, but again, that was an injury. He was injured coming into this game. In fact, all the bettors and Twitterati are out after the Bucks now, as they've been after a bunch of teams this season for presumably, claiming that the Buccaneers should have sat him, should not have played him, or misled the betting community. There's been a lot of people online talking about that kind of thing this season. Did get hurt in this game, aggravated his back. We'll be interested to see if he plays this coming week. I kind of hope he doesn't, so I can get Hubbard in there. Probably will get Hubbard in there regardless. But obviously the big bleeder this week is going to be James Cook. And the concern for Cook here, despite that huge game a few weeks ago, he has been a little bit underwhelming since then. He had, let's see, what was it? When was his big 2 touchdown game in week 11 against Kansas City? Followed it up with a 18-point game last week against San Francisco. But his snap percentage.
Yeah, it's crazy.
He hasn't been over 60 since week 1.
Yeah.
Snap percentage-wise. He's 37, 45, and 45, 3 of his lowest snap percentages the last 3 games that they've played. So the snap percentage is becoming an issue. It's not an issue in week 11 and week 13 when he was running back 9 and running back 8. And these are games when he either had 2 touchdowns or went over 100 yards. But when he's 6 for 20 on 45% of the snaps against the Rams, coming into a matchup next week at Detroit, which is a tough, brutal matchup for a running back, he is tough to trust in week 15.
And I mean, I think it's a couple of factors. Ray Davis didn't really do much in this one. I don't think he actually scored a point, but he's there and they use him. They also use Ty Johnson a little bit too. So it's
Mm-hmm.
more of like a three-headed monster kind of thing where the snap percentage is getting diced up here. They don't know why, but they don't really trust him just to have 20 carries a game. He's only accomplished that once this season at 20 attempts in a game. Also, you have Josh Allen, and Josh Allen,
Yes.
when he's in the red zone, he runs it in, and they trust him to do it. They don't care about him being injured. He hasn't been injured by in his career, at least severely. So that hurts you as well. Now his touchdowns have been up this year from last year. I mean, he's scored double-digit touchdowns, but it's it's hard to do when you have your running quarterback that can just barrel over people and score multiple touchdowns that could have went to the running back.
Absolutely, yeah. Four-headed, really
Yeah.
four-headed monster there. Yeah.
Okay, but you're 8-6. I think you're the fourth seed,
Third
third seed. You're the
Yep.
third seed, so you are in. And just to ramp this up real quick, we will. Well, actually, can we even look at? I guess I can look it up, even though they're just waiting for stat corrections tonight. But we can look at the playoffs standings here. Charlie is on bye this week, so he has nothing to worry about here. He will play the winner of Brian versus Jake. Brian right now has the projections lead 125.88 to 112.76. Sarah plays Scott. Sarah has the lead in projections 121.24 to 114.87. And you play Dustin. Dustin has the projections lead here 127.02 to 118.15. So, yeah, that's our playoff matchups for next week. We are planning to do a podcast next week for the playoff matchups. So we will go back to that when we see some results. But yeah, that's our show. That's the end of the regular season. Thank you all for listening, and we will be back in week 15. Goodbye, everybody.
See ya.
Thank you for listening and your support. If you enjoyed the show, please make sure to like and subscribe on YouTube and Spotify.